Well, it is 12 o'clock here in Happy Valley. I hear the chimes of Old Main off in the distance. It's time for the Penn State Alumni Association's virtual speaker session. We have a great program lined up today. We're going to be talking about the Olympics, the 2020 games now being played in 2021 in Tokyo, Japan. We're going to take a look at the history of Olympics in Japan, in particular the 1940, 1964, and the 2021 Olympic Games with Professor Jessamyn Abel. She is an associate professor in the Asian Studies Department. Again, we are looking forward to her presentation. As always, we want to invite you to let us know who you are and where you're from, just like Bernice Marks has done from Mazatlan, Mexico. Good to see you in the Zoom room once again, Bernice. If you're on Facebook Live, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We'll be getting started in just a minute or two, but we want to know who you are and where you're zooming in from. Go ahead and let us know. I see Vicky in Harrisburg. Yes, I'm back on campus, finally working out of my office. You'll see when my camera goes live here, but I can hear the clock tower of Old Main chiming the noon hour in here in Happy Valley, and it is a welcome sound. Sean Miller from Atherton Hall, he's hearing the bells in the other direction. Good to see you, Sean. Welcome into the virtual speaker session. We'll be getting started in just a minute. Thanks for joining us. See Andrea from Cincinnati. Here to see her sister Jessie. And John Moyer from Chincoteague. What a great place to be spending some time in the late spring. Davidson, Michigan is represented by Teresa Merlot. Good to see you, Teresa. And Jim from Mendham, New Jersey. Welcome. Where else would you rather be than a Zoom full of Penn Staters? Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's virtual session, which is being recorded. Live closed captions are available for this event. You can access them by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of your Zoom video window and clicking show subtitle. You can also customize your caption clicking the stream text link posted in the chat. We are live streaming today's presentation, and the live stream has been made possible through the gracious support of a donor for the Fund for Access, ID, and Audacious Goals. Today's presentation will be archived and available on our website after the event. This afternoon, we welcome Professor Jessamyn Abel. She is an associate professor in the Asian Studies Department and affiliated faculty of the School of International Affairs. Professor Abel taught at Penn State since 2009, and we'll learn more about her in just a minute. During the bidding and preparation for 3 Tokyo Olympiads, canceled 1940 games, the successful 64 games, and the postponed 2021 games, Japanese politicians and activists borrowed the aura of the Olympics for their own purposes, ranging from diplomacy to local infrastructure. Comparing 3 examples of Olympic planning for a single city in disparate times shows the flexibility and persistence of the particular opportunities and pressures created by the Olympics' enduring symbolism as an international festival of peace and amity. In addition to her roles at Penn State, Professor Abel is a historian of modern Japan with interests in cultural history, technology, infrastructure, sports, and international relations. She recently completed the forthcoming book, Dream Super Express, A Cultural History of the World's First Bullet Train. Her other publications include a book on the 20th century development of Japanese internationalism and articles on information society affairs, the Tokyo Olympics, cultural diplomacy, textbooks, and the history of whaling in the 19th and 20th centuries. I'm going to turn the program over to Professor Abel. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me here and giving me a chance to share my research on the Olympics. And thank you to all of you here for tuning in and taking a little time out of your middle of your day to think about the Tokyo Olympics and of the past and the present and the politics behind them. Something that we often hear about the Olympics is that, well, sports are apolitical. Sports transcend politics. And so the Olympics are completely separate from politics. And we hear about this a lot when there are calls to boycott the Olympics because of the policies of the host country, or you remember during the Cold War, lots of medal counts and who's ahead and what's deciding what ideological system is better. And people often said, oh, that's contrary to the spirit of the Olympics to bring this politics into it. But really, the politics have been, the Olympics have been political from the start. And the kind of political maneuvering and manipulation that often gets decried is really an inherent part of the Olympic Games that continues today. So why is that? Why is it that this central idea of the Olympic movement, that it is apolitical, can coincide and sit side by side with the reality that the Olympics constantly get drawn into international, domestic, and even very local political disputes? And I would say there are really a few key aspects of the Olympics that make it particularly susceptible to this kind of political manipulation. And first is that myth itself, that myth that the Olympics are apolitical, itself contributes to their political appropriation. And that has to do with the sort of ambiguous politics of the Olympic movement that claims to be apolitical on the one hand, but on the other hand, promotes a very vague political idea of internationalism. So one of the original principles of the Olympic movement was, in the words of the IOC, to create international amity and goodwill, thus leading to a happier and more peaceful world. Nice words that anyone can get behind, but that is a political goal, right? And so having a political goal that is very open and ambiguous, but at the same time claiming that sports are separate from politics, creates an empty space that then can be filled with almost any political content. And we see that happening again and again throughout history. So Olympic symbolism can be taken up by really all sides in any political struggle, each side making its own claims about what actions truly reflect and concretize that rhetoric of international amity and peace. Another aspect of the Olympics that really makes it conducive to sort of wide-ranging political appropriation is the nested structure of the games, right? These are an ongoing event that is overseen by an international organization for a global audience, but it's organized along national lines, right? You have to be the national team to participate, but then it's hosted by a single city officially. And so that means it's a useful venue at all of those levels, not only in international relations, but also for national and local political contests. And third, since at least the 1930s, the games have been a big media spectacle, right? And it's that spectacle of the games that ensures both domestic and global attention. And that attention means that these are a regular opportunity to really make a statement that gets heard very widely all around the world. Tokyo in particular is a really useful site for thinking about these sort of permanent aspects of the Olympics that make for political appropriation, because Tokyo won the bid to host the Olympics 3 times in 3 very different historical contexts. First time under a militarist government engaged in an ongoing effort at imperialist expansion. Those events were canceled due to World War II in 1938, but there was quite a bit of preparation that I'll talk about in a minute. Second time Tokyo won its bid was in after post-war reconstruction and democratization. Japan was in an alliance with the United States in the context of the Cold War, was experiencing very high-speed economic growth. These were the early years of a decades-long period of single-party rule by the Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP. And then the third time, Japan was in a declining position internationally, losing the rank of second place in the world economy to China. And most importantly, this was after the triple disaster in Fukushima. So there was a lot of focus on these being the recovery Olympics, right? Recovering from the earthquake, tsunami, and subsequent nuclear disaster in Fukushima. So 3 different successful bids to host the Olympics in 3 different historical moments. Putting them together side by side really helps to show the flexibility and the persistence of these particular opportunities and pressures that are created by the spectacle of the Olympic Games. In preparation for all 3 Tokyo Olympiads, the canceled 1940, the successful 1964, and the so far postponed 2020 Olympics, political actors mobilized the symbolism and the rhetoric of the Olympics for very particular political fights, from the international, using sports diplomacy to present a certain image of Japan, to the national, using the Olympics to critique the state structure or the ruling party, down to really nitty-gritty local disputes over trying to improve the sewer system and the like. So let me talk about each of these 3 events. Starting in 1940. As I said, these were canceled in 1938, so they didn't happen, and that leads to the nickname the Phantom Olympics. But we can consider the goals and the planning and the preparation that took place for those games. And I'll just talk about one kind of example that encapsulates all 3 levels, international, national, and local to some extent. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the context. The Tokyo first made its bid to host the Olympic Games in 1932, so just after the Japanese invasion of Manchuria and the declaration of its puppet state of Manchukuo in northeast China. The selection of Tokyo, the decision in the favor of Tokyo took place in 1936. So this was after Japan had withdrawn from the League of Nations, the primary body for international cooperation at the time. So given that context, the Japanese government really thought that the Olympics would help compensate to some extent, in some ways, for the loss of the League of Nations and help to ameliorate the criticism that Japan was experiencing on the world stage for its invasion of China. And they said, this is going to be a chance for people's diplomacy, right? That because the Olympics are separate from politics, right? Taking advantage of that myth, they said, this is a chance for us to hold this festival of peace and really change the way the world views Japan. And you can really see that ideal of the separation of sports and politics being mobilized by the leadership of the Olympics. For instance, the Japanese director of the Japanese Organizing Committee writes very soon after the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937, which led to the full-scale war between Japan and China. He wrote, once every 4 years, we mutually set aside hostility and suspend political affairs, and all of humanity cooperates in gathering for celebration, focusing on the heroic champions who transmit the Olympic spirit. So you can see this idea that, well, because we set aside politics for the Olympics, it's a really good chance for Japan to invite people who maybe don't agree with Japanese politics in Asia, invading their neighbors, and show them what a Japan that they want them to see. But making a good impression on the world also required making some changes at home. And there was a lot of anxiety that Tokyo would not live up to global expectations of what the capital of a world power should look like. So there was a lot of attention to fixing up not only Tokyo's infrastructure, but also changing the behaviors of its people. And so the government and Olympic organizers cooperated in a number of what they called public morality campaigns, trying to convince people don't litter, don't spit in public and do these things that will embarrass us in front of all these foreign tourists who come for the Olympics. But those very campaigns became a point for critique of certain government policies, such as government censorship. This is a moment of intense censorship of any points of view that were against the government or otherwise deemed unacceptable. So one prominent government critic who spent a lot of time in jail in the 1930s, Nakano Shigeharu, wrote an article in one of the major daily newspapers in Japan, arguing that these public morality campaigns can't possibly be effective because they are not addressing the fundamental problems of Japanese society. And he conceded, he said, yes, in Tokyo, the streets are strewn with garbage and the parks and playgrounds are full of trash, bamboo wrappers, orange peels, and we spit wantonly all over the place. So he's not making Tokyo look very nice. But he says they're not going to work because you can't just be fastidious about spit in the street and completely indifferent to national politics. And this is the quote I have up here on the screen, and I'll just continue with the boldface part. He continued, indeed, to spit phlegm on the floor of the train and mash it with the tooth of a geta sandal is the Japanese sense of public morality that matches the political silence forced upon the Japanese people. Right, so he's using the soapbox of the Olympics to make what is a much more dangerous move of actually criticizing the government and criticizing the policies of censorship that keep getting him thrown into jail. So as I said, the Tokyo Olympics of 1940 were canceled, but the goal of hosting was realized nearly 3 decades later with the 1964 Olympics. The bid for those Tokyo Games began in 1952, the year the US occupation of Japan ended, and they culminated in the successful hosting of the 18th Olympiad in 1964. So those years were a very different time in Japanese history, but the goals and the uses of the post-war games were very similar to those of the 1930s, which is that they served as a tool for promoting desired policies of the ruling party, the LDP in this case, as well as a rallying point for opposition on issues like remilitarization, the nuclear weapons, the alliance with the United States, and importantly, the revision of Japan's post-war constitution, which encoded Japan's renunciation of the use of force in international relations. So it's often called Japan's peace constitution. At the level of diplomacy, the Japanese government and Olympic organizers talked a lot about using the so-called Festival of Peace and Amity, taking that phrase from the Olympic Charter, to introduce a new Japan to the world. One symbol of that was the torchbearer pictured here on the screen, Sakai Yoshinori, who was born on August 6th.
Jessamyn?
Yes?
I don't want to interrupt you, but you're not sharing your PowerPoint.
Oh, for heaven's sake, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, let me just back up. So we had Tokyo 1940. That's just a postcard there showing the tying in the Olympic rings with the map of Japan there. And I quote from Nakano. Okay, so on to 1964. Using this Festival of Peace and Amity to introduce a new Japan to the world, symbolized by this young man who was born outside of Hiroshima on the day that the atomic bomb was dropped there. So really symbolizing Japan's post-war recovery, but also really trying to introduce Japan to the world as a new and emerging technological and industrial power. So doing that through not only the Olympic facilities, but also this was the first Olympics in which all timekeeping devices and other measurement devices were domestically made in the host country. So they had a lot of big signs saying Seiko on them. So that was a little bit of an advertisement for Japanese products. But there was also a lot of anxiety about putting on a good face for the Olympics again by showing off a good national capital in Tokyo. So this, as in most Olympic cities, it was an opportunity to improve local infrastructure. And this was a steady theme in the discourse surrounding the planning, building arenas, building roads, building hotels. For example, the head of the sewerage department in the Tokyo Municipal Waterworks wrote in a local urban planning journal, as we welcome the 1964 Olympic Games, of all public facilities, the biggest headache is the traffic problem. In Tokyo today, 500,000 cars are jammed up like bugs to sugar. An equally serious problem is that of Tokyo's sewers. He then points out, some sewage goes into the rivers untreated, and the Sumida River is so filthy that it stinks intolerably. So then he points out these problems, and then he goes on to detail plans for the expansion of the sewer system. You can see there's really a concern that, well, we want to put on this festival of peace and amity, but if everybody's just walking around holding their noses because the rivers stink, that's not going to make a very good impression. So even down to the level of the sewers, there's this idea of the connection of international relations to the most local political questions. So not just the sewers got revamped for the Olympics, but also the new bullet train goes into service just over a week before the opening ceremonies. There's a new monorail to the airport, which many people take into the city as they arrive. And the famous National Gymnasium, designed by one of Japan's top architects, was really a central facility. So all of these contributed to a new image of Japan, but of course, Olympic symbolism was available not only to the ruling party, but also to the opposition parties and other anti-establishment activists. So in the context in which the LDP had been in power since 1955, this is the start of decades of one-party rule in Japan. And as in the 1930s, Olympic planning provided an opportunity for opposition parties and activists to present alternative visions of post-war Japan and criticisms of the ruling party and its policies. For many people, the planning of the 1964 Olympics really brought them back to the preparation for the 1940 games that didn't happen. And comparisons and connections were really quite common. One of these comes from a leftist activist, Kitani Yatsushi, who made a comparison of the policies of the time of the early 1960s to the militarism that derailed the 1940 Olympics. And he then asked, can the Tokyo Olympics be a festival of peace and amity in the context of the active promotion of policies of the strengthening of American military bases, the nuclear armament of Japan, and the revival of militarism? So even as the organizers and the government are talking about this as a festival of peace and amity, you can see the opposition is also claiming the mantle of peace and amity, saying, we too are looking for peace and amity, and the way you're doing it is not right? Because that idea of peace and amity can be defined in many ways. So it was available to both sides in a political debate. Coming to more or less the present day, for 2020, and here you can see the moment, the reaction among then Prime Minister Abe and other leaders of the government when they hear that Tokyo has been selected for the 2020 Olympics. They're all very excited, but then again, there were a lot of concern about Tokyo's infrastructures and how it's going to do for the Olympics. The sewers were rebuilt for the 1964 Olympics, but that means they're now a half a century old. And so when Tokyo won its bid in 2013, there was a lot of concern about what's going to happen with all these foreign visitors coming in, and are our sewers going to be able to stand up to it? So again, calls to revamp the sewer system. And in many debates about local infrastructures, advocates use the Olympics as kind of ammunition to support their argument. One example is on roads along the marathon route, there were plans to widen the roads and bury electric wires. But the residents in those areas resisted because the plans required destroying hundreds of mature ginkgo trees that you see pictured here, and other large, very old trees. And people on both sides of this struggle claimed that their preferred outcome would present the better public face to the international audience for the Olympics, right? That either having the wide roads will look good and not having these wires overhead, or having these beautiful old trees are going to look good. And both said it's important for the Olympics that we do it this way. But the symbolism and the pressure of the putting on a public face for the Olympics is used by both sides. And you can see a similar dynamic on the scale of national politics, as both political leaders and their critics used the anticipation of the Olympics to raise the level of urgency for policies that were not actually related to the event itself. So the phrase that I have up there, "in time for the Olympics," was just ubiquitous in the lead up to 2020, as that year was pinpointed as the goal for projects and changes not only for Tokyo, but for the nation as a whole. And one really big, important example is that Prime Minister Abe announced in May 2017 that he was working on a revision of the Constitution that would be in place and take effect by 2020. And this was included eliminating that so-called peace article of the Constitution. An editorial in the major daily newspaper, national daily newspaper, Asahi, vehemently opposed this plan, insisting that the nation must not allow the prime minister to change Japan's identity as a so-called peace nation through revision of the war-renouncing constitution. And he said the prime minister, and I'll quote here, "connected constitutional revision to the Tokyo Olympics by setting 2020 as the deadline." Right, so constitutional revision has no direct connection to the Olympics, but the spectacle of the event is such that the timing itself created a link. To say 2020 was synonymous with the Olympics in Japan. Politicians also bolstered their arguments by making explicit those indirect connections of a particular issue with the Olympics. So, for example, opposition politician Kaeda Banri, who at the time was head of one of the opposition parties, started talking about the importance of the event as, using that old phrase, festival of peace and amity, in his critiques of the Abe administration's policies regarding Fukushima, the triple disaster there. So in an October 2013 session of Japan's parliament, the Diet, Kaeda responded to a speech that Abe had given with references to the Olympics. And he promised to cooperate to make it a festival of peace and amity, and specifically in order to show the world Japan's recovery and to show gratitude for the help and encouragement that had come from around the world. But he also used that as a critique of the Abe administration. He said, because the Olympics are a festival of peace and amity, aren't they a heartfelt promise among all the world's countries and peoples, including neighboring countries, to promote peace and amity? And he said Japan is falling short of that promise because it's been focusing on the Olympics instead of the combined problems of nuclear safety and the recovery of the people in the towns affected by the 3/11 disasters. So Kaeda used the spectacle of Abe and Tokyo Governor Koike celebrating here at the closing ceremonies in the 2016 Rio Olympics, juxtaposing that with a story of his own visit to the afflicted town of Kesennuma, pictured here with a huge ship that had been kind of grounded by the tsunami. He used that contrast to underline the dissonance between the fun and the extravagance of the Olympic Games on the one hand, and the struggles of the people who are still suffering from the after effects of disaster on the other hand. Ongoing problems in Fukushima also became popular in all kinds of both advocacy and critique of the Olympics. On the one hand, people saying, hey, we can all work together and recover together, and the Olympics will help us do that too. On the other hand, you can see on the right here, kind of bringing the the image of the 5 rings of the Olympics together with the idea of radiation to say, no, look, we still haven't cleaned up in Fukushima and we're being distracted and resources are being taken away from that because we're so focused on the Olympics. So that in itself became a very strong critique before even the latest problem, which is, of course, a global pandemic. And a lot of discussion in the lead up to summer 2020, finally resulting, as you know, in postponing the games to 2021. But the sensitivity around the Japanese government's response to the pandemic and its connection with the Olympics is really clear in the organizing committee's response to this magazine cover of the Journal of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan, that, as you can see, they combined the Tokyo 2020 symbol with an image of the COVID-19 virus to kind of really, in an image, bring up the connection between those two things. The organizing committee responded by demanding that this image be removed from the cover of the magazine, which they complied by just taking it away. They said, you're violating our copyright, and put it on that basis, but the core of the offense was to really connect the Olympic Games to the problems of dealing with the pandemic. And that has been a very strong critique of then Prime Minister Abe for a very long time. And the pandemic may really have caused the goal of Olympic diplomacy to backfire for Japan, because instead of showing off the Japanese government and society in the great light that they hope to present, it's instead highlighting the government's failures and leaving a very strong impression that the Japanese government is putting the billions and billions of dollars, yen, spent on the games ahead of the question of public health. And you can see that symbolized in this image, which is being used for a campaign of to get signatures to promote canceling the Olympics, again, using those 5 rings of the Olympics, but in a creative way to say, don't do it. And so far it looks like they're just going to keep on keeping on. And the open question now is whether or not there will be local spectators in the games, but we will soon find out. So let me stop there and open up for questions.
Excellent. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A tab. We do have a couple questions coming in and that were pre-submitted. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the funding model for Olympics. I know some Olympic Games, especially ones held in the United States, have been privately funded through corporate sponsorship, through donations. When you say that they are using Olympics for political purposes in Japan, how are they funding the Olympics that are taking place there, both in '64 and now in 2021?
It's really a mixture. There are all kinds of monies going into it. I don't have the details of how much is coming from what pocket, but it's a combination of the national government, the local government, lots of private monies as well, and they all stand to lose billions. There was just a report that was issued this morning by the Nomura Research Institute that said if the Tokyo Olympics get canceled, it's going to cost, I think they said an additional $17 billion for Tokyo. And one of the disputes between Tokyo and the IOC has been who is on the hook for all this money. It's laid out in contracts, but yeah, there's a lot of dispute about that, of course.
Yeah, and whether the Olympics are held or the Olympics are canceled this year, right? Which it looks, every indicator right now is that the Olympics will be held. There's still a significant amount of money to be the limitation on crowd size and tourism, which is a big part of the economic engine. around the Olympics.
Yeah, that report that I mentioned said something like, if they hold it without audiences, it'll bring in this many, like $1.6 billion or something, but then it was another $16 billion if they have people in the stadiums, right? So it's actually just a huge amount is actually going to come from people being there in the stadiums. So
when we were talking off before we went live, we were talking about some comparisons to other Olympics, the political comparison, if you will, to the Berlin Games in 36, and how leaders of Japan saw the quote unquote success or the perception of the Nazi Party in Germany to Japan. How do you think that would have played out for the Japanese had they hosted the games? Do you think it was grounded in reality, or do you think that the rest of the world would have seen it for what it was?
Well, it's really hard to say since it definitely, I mean, it didn't even come close to happening. But if you compare it to 1936, it's interesting. You know, I have always looked back before I ever started doing research on the Olympics. I always kind of looked back on my popular idea of the 1936 Olympics, which basically consisted of Jesse Owens winning lots of gold medals, and my feeling was, oh, well, that really showed them, right? But if you actually read the thoughts and memories of writings of people who went to the Berlin Olympics in 1936, they said, wow, Germany is really great right now, and they treated us very well, and we had a great time there, right? So it had that kind of, on a person-to-person level, did give a good impression to the athletes and other Americans who were there. However, it certainly didn't prevent a war, right? And so there's just a limit to what this kind of sports diplomacy can do. So yes, it may have, if Tokyo had been able to host the Olympics, sure, that may have changed the minds of certain athletes or certain Olympic representatives. It wouldn't have stopped a war. That's not something sports diplomacy can do, I think.
Right. How about the if it's not stopping a war? There's other kind of diplomatic and kind of internationalization goals that can be accomplished. Randall's asking a question here in the Q&A. Wondering if there might be a comparison to the 64 Olympics in Tokyo to the 2008 Beijing Games, where both countries used it as an opportunity to emerge on the international stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, as I sat at home and watched the Beijing Olympics on television, I couldn't help but think of exactly the sorts of things that at that moment I was working on writing in my book that I was writing way back then, which had a couple of chapters on the Olympics, which was, it was just the same kind of talk. I don't know how many times I heard the announcers on American television saying, Beijing's coming out party. And it's like, really, you think we've never heard of China before? But I mean, the same idea that they're trying to say, no, this is China. Like, you think you know China, but look, this is China. Exactly the same thing in 1964, right? And what they wanted to do in 1940, but what they managed to do in a different way in 1964, which was to say, you think you know Japan. At the time, in the early 1960s, the image of Japan was really about like really cheap, junky imports, just recovering economy, not a place that you would be interested in having as a diplomatic partner, really, or certainly not be interested in importing industrial products. And this was a chance to say, no, look at these amazing timekeeping devices that we're making. Look at our incredible high-speed railway that you guys can't even come close to, and it was really a chance to bring people's attention to this new Japan that had fabulous infrastructure, and you could really see Beijing doing very much the same thing. I think it backfired more intensely with Beijing because just the same media didn't exist in 1964. You know, you remember in Beijing, every misstep was broadcast everywhere, right? And so you can see a lot more behind the scenes today than you could back then. So I think it was more controllable in the 1960s than it is today.
So Christy Kowalski is sharing a story of her family. Her grandfather, Nick Vukomanek, was a Penn State grad and was scheduled to participate in the 40 Olympics until it was canceled. That's, Penn Staters have a long history in participating in the Olympics.
Yeah.
And there are a number of Penn Staters who have had their Olympic dreams either stripped or put on hold. Kathy Mills missed the 80 Olympics because of our boycott. But again, another Penn State and 1940 Olympics connection with Nick Vukomanek. So shout out to Christy for sharing that story. Teresa Merlot has been chatting, putting a number of things in the chat. Really strong connection for her. Her parents were at the 64 Olympics track and field event while she watched on TV at home in Tokyo. So she is in possession of many books and souvenirs. She was born and raised in Tokyo and went to the American school from K through 12, and then arrived at Penn State 74 to 84 with PhD and liberal arts grad. So strong connections to the 64 Olympic Games for Teresa as well.
There were a couple of Penn Staters at the 64 games as well, two gymnasts. So if any of you are from the 60s era of Penn State, maybe you know Kathy Corrigan and Greg Weiss were there. So those were buddies of yours.
Excellent. Wang is asking about the lead time that Japan had in preparing for distributing a COVID-19 vaccine to the public. She wants to know kind of what the heck, maybe you could say a little bit about, some of the criticism in Japan leading up to the Olympics have been, wanting to get over other tragedies that have happened there. A case could be made that the focus on the Olympics has taken their focus away from COVID-19 vaccine distribution. What has your work and your study on this led you to believe?
It's very difficult to really come down clearly on it. Part of the problem with vaccines has just been getting their hands on them. The Japanese government very early purchased a huge number of pre-purchased, a huge number of vaccines, but then couldn't actually get them delivered. Right. So why that happened is not entirely clear. So part of it just has to do with actually physically getting the vaccines into the country. Then there's the approval process, which took some time. Would that have been different if there wasn't attention to the Olympics? It's not entirely clear that those were directly related, but earlier on, I think that the problem in terms of focus on the Olympics is not so much with the vaccination as with the initial response to the pandemic. And the Japanese government got a lot of praise for keeping numbers down in Japan early on, but people did criticize the Abe administration quite strongly they accused them of sort of downplaying the seriousness of it so as not to threaten the 2020 Olympics, that they were so focused on making sure that could keep going. They were saying, no, it's fine. We're fine. Everything's fine. When things weren't really fine. So there are many people who feel that things could have gone better from the start if there had been a more forthright dealing with it and not this effort to kind of sweep it under in favor of the Olympics. In terms of right now, vaccination is one thing. Another very large concern for the medical community, especially in Tokyo, is that the IOC contract requires the host city, and for every Olympics, the contract requires the host city to provide a certain number of doctors and other medical professionals and hospital rooms for any athletes or other Olympic participants who need health attention while they're at the Olympics. And Japanese doctors associations are just like, we don't have it. we don't have spare doctors right now. Like, we're all very busy. And so the medical associations are really coming out very strongly against continuing with the Olympics because they just feel overburdened already.
Has any of your work led you to look at the Winter Olympics that have also been hosted in Japan? And was the bids for those similar to for Tokyo in terms of wanting the appearance on the international stage? Sapporo and Nagano have also hosted, they've hosted Winter Olympics in Japan.
Yeah, there hasn't been quite the same excitement and attention to the Winter Games. In general, I think that's often the case, but certainly there wasn't quite the prominence. I myself have not written about the Winter Games, although I did happen to be living in Japan during the Nagano Games, yeah, that was when I was studying Japanese there. So maybe I was just too busy studying and not watching enough Olympics on TV. But I felt like there wasn't quite the buzz and excitement in general as there was. I mean, I would compare it to, say, I was also there during the 2002 co-hosted FIFA World Cup. And there you couldn't step outside or even inside my apartment. I could hear people cheering whenever the Japanese team scored a goal from all around the apartments all around. There wasn't that same kind of generalized feeling of excitement during the Nagano Games. That said, there was a new stretch of bullet train built out to Nagano for that. So there was definitely that same kind of building up of the infrastructure that generally happens for Olympic Games.
How did you become interested in this topic and this line of research?
Well, I came at it from, as you mentioned, my first book was on the development of internationalism in Japan. And I was wondering, in what ways were there people in Japan? What happened to all these internationalists who wanted to join the League of Nations after Japan quit in 1933? So how else were they trying to be internationalist? And so one answer to that was that they turned away from sort of political organizations and started focusing on cultural diplomacy. And one aspect of cultural diplomacy that a lot of energy went into was trying to host the Olympics. And so I looked into bidding and planning for the 1940 Games as a way to try to understand where did that energy for international cooperation go. And then I wanted to think about, well, how did that carry over into the post-war by looking at similarities and differences with the 1964 Games. And so those two Olympics are dealt with in my book, but that came out in 2015. So no time to get 2020 in there, although I think there may be a reference in the conclusion to more to come.
You know, you've referenced the perception a country can gain or can change their perception on the international scale. Are there in-country benefits as well? You know, a country may be divided going into the Olympics. Is there examples of maybe national unity that emerges after big events like this?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can potentially, right? Not always. So actually 64 and 2020 make for a really good example to show two sides of that, because for the 1964 Games, there was just very widespread support for holding the Games. Almost nobody was really unhappy about it. Even those people I was talking about who critiqued the government, they didn't say we shouldn't hold the Olympics. They said we should hold the Olympics and we shouldn't remilitarize Japan, right? It was just really using the idea of the Olympics to fight for their side in something completely unrelated. And so because everybody was supporting it together, it became, the way people talked about it was, it's a safe nationalism, or it's a good nationalism. So coming out of the wartime period, when being nationalistic, flying the flag, it all kind of had a stickiness of war on it, right? And so there was a distastefulness about seeming too nationalistic. But you can fly your flag and cheer when your team wins. when your athlete wins, right? That felt completely innocent. So people finally felt, yeah, it's safe to be nationalistic. A colleague has written an article about kind of the renationalization of important symbols that had been tarnished by the wartime period. The emperor presided over the 1964 games, right? He came to be seen as the head of state, even though the Constitution clearly says he is not the sovereign of Japan. He presided in this position, which is supposed to be the head of state. The national flag, the national anthem, all of these things were very much associated with the wartime period, but because they were used for the Olympics, they got this kind of peacetime cleaning done. And so it really helped to sort of resurrect or restore Japanese nationalism. In contrast, 2020 has not been strongly supported. I mean, especially since the pandemic. Recent polls are saying about 2/3 maybe of Japan does not want the Olympics to be held in Tokyo. But even long before the pandemic, even when Tokyo was just making a bid for the Olympics, local support was medium, right? A lot of people in Tokyo and elsewhere strongly opposed hosting the Olympics. So this has really been much more a divisive event rather than a unifying event at home as well, because there are these strong opposing sides to so many aspects of it.
One of the I guess characteristics of the modern Olympics, and I'm not talking about modern as in versus the Olympics, but modern as in almost every event and every hour of the Olympics is going to be televised or streamed, or the ability to consume that content now. There's more of a stage for political and social messages to be sent. I think this Tokyo Olympics coming up on the heels and really maybe in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic, strife around the world, whether it's Palestine and Israel or Ukraine and Russia, or insert warring factions right into that sentence, the struggles of people of color all around the world. Is it your sense that this might be one of the more politically active or politically charged Olympic Games in recent memory?
I'm wondering about the same thing, and I suspect it might be. That would not be something new. There was some really important Cold War political struggles going on in 1964, and in fact, a number of countries were uninvited to the Tokyo Olympics and not allowed to participate because of an alternative, the Games of the Newly Emerging Forces event that they had attended that the IOC had opposed. But in terms of actual athletes making protests, the very next Olympics in Mexico, there were those famous Black Power, Tommy Smith and the other names are escaping me. But they were incredibly well known because they were fairly rare. Whereas now, following on this year of athletes really very publicly and very consciously making political statements, and that being increasingly accepted, there's actually been some discussion, and I'm not sure where they have fallen at this moment, because there's kind of been some back and forth about whether political protests will be allowed at the Olympics. And the IOC was kind of saying no politics at the Olympics, right? This is part of their idea that, oh, the Olympics are separate from politics. I just said, no, they're not, but they still keep insisting on that. And one of the reasons is that then they can say, well, we don't want that politics at the Olympics, right? And so more and more people are arguing you can't say that to athletes. Like,
yeah. So last question before we wrap up here. This will mark the third consecutive Olympiad on the continent of Asia. Is it something about, and really I think it's the eighth, the four out of the last eight, with two being in Beijing and then Tokyo and then South Korea. Is it something about the countries in Asia that are more adept, or what has led them to be more successful in their host bids?
Well, I don't know if it's so much more successful as more willing. There are fewer and fewer cities that are willing to host the Olympics. And we've seen this here at home not here at home in State College, but in the US, with Boston putting in a bid and then pulling out due to popular opposition. And it's increasingly borderline whether or not it's going to actually be good for your city to host the Olympics. And the stories of economic overruns and financial holes that take decades to dig out of are just very well known. And so it takes a particular kind of city that wants to do certain things anyway, to be willing to host. The attractions of hosting, a lot of them have to do with exactly that comparison that you brought up between Beijing and Tokyo 64, which is this desire to present an image to the world, right? So if you as a nation have a new image, you want to change your international image, the Olympics in your capital city or in some other major city are potentially a good way to do that, right? So you can get national government support if it jibes with national policies, right? So you have to have a city that wants to do it in a country that wants to support it. And it's just increasingly hard to find that combination. I don't know if it's Asia specifically, but maybe countries where there is a desire for an image change. I mean, certainly Sochi, you could see Russia kind of wanting to say something, change its image on the international stage there. Coming up, the crazy idea of a Beijing Winter Olympics. We'll see how that goes. If it goes, I mean, some people are saying the Olympics are done. I don't believe that. The Olympics aren't done. But it is increasingly difficult with the current model of the Olympics, to get a city to host.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us and for sharing your work here at Penn State. It's a fascinating topic. I think we could go much longer, but we are out of time today. So thank you so much for joining us. If people are interested in your work and maybe finding other books that you've read or learning more about the work you're doing here at Penn State, where can they go to find that?
The book that I wrote that has the chapters on the Olympics is available at it's actually, last I looked, pretty cheap on Amazon. It's really old now. It's called, I can't remember what it's called. The International Minimum. That's the name. And then come January, the book on the bullet train will be available. That's called Dream Super Express. I guess if you Googled my name, I think maybe on my website, I have a list of various publications. Most recently, I wrote about a lot of the things that I spoke about today in the Rutledge Handbook on Sports in Asia. So get that from your library and you can read it's just a few pages long, I think.
Excellent. And for those who are here in the Zoom room, we just dropped that link into the chat for the international minimum creativity, contradiction, and weatherhead. So we've just dropped that in there. Jessamyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
And we want to thank everybody else who is Zooming in with us today. Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, we'll be hosting additional speaker sessions in the coming weeks and months. And this programming is in addition to the wide array of online networking and career programs that are available throughout the year. You can find our full listing at alumni.psu.edu/events. Thank you for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are
Penn State.